I've just disembarked a cruise on the biggest American cruise ship ever designed for the Chinese market. We sailed from Singapore to Tokyo, and even though I've cruised plenty of times in the past in America or Europe, this trip surprised me in every way possible. From the ship to the passengers, the entertainment to the destinations, it was completely different to what I'm used to. I have cruised with Royal Caribbean in the past, and I've always enjoyed the experience, so when I saw that they were cruising in Asia, I thought to myself this would be the perfect way to give it a go. The reviews of this ship were considerably worse than the rest in the fleet, but I was honestly ready for anything and I wanted to find out why. We boarded the ship in Singapore, and despite the fact that there were lots of different nationalities on board and different visas needed, it actually didn't take as long as I expected. They did take and keep our passports, which is very common on Asia cruises, but because we had copies of our passports and our driving licenses, it wasn't a problem. I'd already checked in online pre-cruise, and because I'm from the UK, I didn't need any visas for the places that we were visiting. Spectrum of the Seas was built in 2019 and she can hold almost 5,000 people at maximum capacity. I'd learn later that the most common nationality on board was Singaporean, which does make sense and it explains a lot of things that happened on this cruise. Walking into the ship was such an exciting feeling. I took a cruise a couple of years ago on board Anthem of the Seas, which is the sister ship, meaning that they have pretty much the same design. Spectrum is basically like Anthem's Chinese cousin, and I was excited to see what the differences would be. I immediately noticed that all of the signs were in English and Mandarin as we headed off to our muster station. This is where we would meet in an emergency, and it was very quick because we'd already watched the safety videos on the app pre-cruise. That is one very good thing to come out of the pandemic. Most cruise lines have got rid of the safety drill where you have to line up on the promenade deck, which is good because it was very, very hot in Singapore and I could not have stood outside for long. Pre-cruise, I bought myself a soda package, and that meant that I could have unlimited soda throughout the cruise. One big difference between this cruise and others was that the Coke had a special ingredient, a special Japanese ingredient. They kept trying to feed it to me, and more about that later. There aren't any self-serve soda machines on this ship, which is a shame as they do have them on other Royal Caribbean ships, but I collected my bottle that you would usually use for the machines anyway. If I've paid for it, you can bet I'm going to be taking it home. Of course I am. This area really is the heart of the ship. It stretches most of the length and it is lined with restaurants and bars. On Anthem, there is an included pizza restaurant here called Sorrento's, but on Spectrum that is nowhere to be seen. It turns out that that was moved up and into the buffet because of the culture around walking and eating in most of Asia. Here in the UK or the US, it is very common to pick up a piece of pizza and to eat it while standing or walking, but if you're from somewhere like Japan, it is considered very rude to walk and eat. There were lots of interesting differences like this that I would discover as the cruise went on. By this point, I was getting pretty hungry and I decided to head up to the buffet. All of the food in here is included in the cruise fare and it's open almost all of the time. I really didn't know what to expect from the food when I walked in, and with so much variety in the nationalities on board, it seemed like an impossible task to keep everybody fed and everybody happy. I love this big bright open space, and although it felt busy, it didn't feel overwhelming. I've certainly been in busier buffets before. The buffet is always busy on the first day as the dining rooms aren't normally open for lunch, and boarding a cruise understandably makes everybody very hungry. I grabbed myself an odd combination of noodles, rice and vegetables, and it was exactly what I needed. The hole in my stomach was just perfectly rice and noodle shaped. This is a rare meal where I did not have ketchup on it, but they did have a ketchup station and it was called Ketchup Please, which I thought was very cute. As we were up on deck 14, we decided to have a look around at the outside spaces. There was no one in the pool, probably because it was too hot, and I could have had maybe 200 sun lounges if I wanted to. At one end, there is an impressive kids splash area with a normal swimming pool next to it and a wheel that Captain Hudson tried to steer before he fell off. Beyond that is a really nice inside pool, and a little further is a solarium which I wouldn't explore until the next day, but where I would end up spending a lot of my time. At the other end of the ship was the sports court with the included surf simulator, skydive simulator, and a massive, massive bumper car arena. It was around now that I noticed the big pod on top of the ship. It was on a long arm and it is called the North Star. I went in this on Anthem of the Seas and I hoped that I would have time to do it on this itinerary too. We did have a very busy cruise planned with excursions in most of the ports, but I was hoping that we would have some time to relax. The jet lag certainly was more difficult than what I'm used to. I was struggling struggling. Going east always seems more tricky to adjust to, and it wasn't until around day 5 that I managed to sleep through the night completely. Not that it mattered though, of course, cruises are fantastic places for naps. The sky as we sailed away from Singapore was very creepy looking. I could actually see the rain from so far away, but it was very warm. It doesn't look like it, but it was very, very warm. I hoped that we would have calm seas for the cruise, as we did have 5 full sea days. Heading back down into our cabin, we discovered a piece of paper with 2 full pages about the documents, landing cards, and customs forms that we would need in each port. Nothing was particularly difficult, there was just quite a lot of it. The places we visited on this cruise were the best places I've ever been to, without a doubt. They were just fascinating. The experience on the ship was the most interesting cruise I've ever been on too. It was now that I discovered what is called Coke Plus, and I think it is my duty to tell you about it. We went to 270 at the back of the ship. It is this huge lounge with these incredible glass windows. They have a cafe here where we would sometimes get lunch, and I went to the bar and asked for a Coke Zero. The waiter gave me a Coke Plus and I thought nothing of it. I sat down, and because I did have a Wi-Fi package, I had bought the Wi-Fi to work, I thought to myself, I'm just going to Google what the plus is. Wouldn't it be funny if the plus was something like a laxative? And it was. A news story popped up that said Japan is losing its mind and its bowels over a new health drink. It tasted kind of bizarre, it was sort of dusty, and it's safe to say that I didn't drink it. I'm so glad I had the internet and I Googled it, or who knows what could have happened. I'm sure drinking 1 or 2 is totally fine, but I can easily drink 5 or 10 sodas a day on a cruise, and that does not bear thinking about. I hope that I wouldn't encounter this drink again, but I would not be so lucky. Wandering back through the ship, I noticed a big difference from the American version Anthem. On this ship, the main dining room was open and I could look down at people eating. On Anthem, the main dining rooms were quite dark and they were tucked away, so I thought that this was a great change. A change that did get me thinking about dinner. I logged on to the Royal Caribbean app, the same way that I have on Royal Caribbean cruises in the past, and I noticed that I couldn't book dinner, which I did think was odd. I had my time dining, which was flexible, and usually you just book the time that you want on your phone. No problem though, I thought I will just phone up and I'll book a couple of nights in advance until I know what sort of routine I fall into. A lot of people that do the flexible dining do seem to just book the same time every day anyway. They answered very quickly and it was easy to book, but it was just a bit weird that it wasn't as easy as it was on other cruises. We headed to the main dining room for dinner and we were seated on the 2nd level. The menu wasn't really anything too different from a cruise you'd find in America or Europe. There were the same kinds of cruise classics and all of the food that we had was good. The service was friendly and we were in and out in about an hour, which is what I like. I did hope that I would be able to try some new foods and some new dishes as I'd come all this way, but I knew that Royal Caribbean had a different theme for their food each day, so I'd just have to wait until tomorrow to see what the theme would be. I did go to the main dining room on UK night. I didn't plan to, I just showed up and it was UK night, but it was nice as I was so far from home and away for quite a long time. The ship really didn't feel too busy and I suspected that it may not be full. That's pretty normal on a cruise of this length and in this part of the world. It isn't really a cruise you can take your kids on for the week or one you can just invite your friends on for the weekend, so it tends to be people who have more time to spare. I did find out that over 400 people were taking this 12-night cruise and then staying on for the next 12-night cruise, so they were doing at least 24 nights and some of them even longer than that. At this point, I was feeling pretty confused about the bad reviews that I'd read. There were lots of 1 and 2 star reviews for this ship and I wanted to find out why. I think a lot of it is that people book this cruise expecting it to be exactly the same as it is in America, which of course it isn't. Some of the complaints about the other guests, which, I mean, that is what it is, the cruise line can't do much about that, and a few of the complaints are just so ridiculous that I cannot take them too seriously. Like one complaint that said, the laundry bag is just a paper bag, not cloth. They gave the cruise 1 star, and I cannot imagine something like that ruining my cruise. It's worth remembering that upset people are far more likely to make the effort to review something, so it does usually skew worse than if they surveyed everybody. I did wonder, of course, if I might encounter any of the problems mentioned though. I was expecting the demographics of the passengers on this cruise to be older than what they seemed at this point. There were older people on this cruise, of course, but most were just adults with some kids and some teenagers. It seemed like a real mix on board, and I definitely heard other Brits, I'd heard Americans, I'd heard Australians, and I'd heard a lot of different languages that I couldn't identify from afar. I did wonder how the cruise line could cater entertainment-wise to such a diverse crowd, and I was excited to see a show or two in the theatre, but I did decide to call it a night after a quick lap of the top deck. It was a very quick lap, but not this quick. My Apple Watch thought that I did 10 kilometers in 18 minutes, which is record breaking because I accidentally logged it as an outside walk, so it thought that I walked the entire distance that the cruise ship moved. There was still so much of the cruise ship to explore, but I knew that I had 12 nights to do it. I missed breakfast completely the next day because of my jet lag, but most days I would get myself to the buffet and I would have my usual bread and bananas. It's still really bizarre to me that a donut is considered a breakfast food, but apparently it is, and who am I to judge? I had plenty on this cruise. The breakfast buffet included a full English, the usual continental bits and bobs, but the difference was that there were also lots of options of things that I don't even recognize. There was so much watermelon too, my goodness, I've never seen it. Plates and plates of watermelon. I definitely think that this was a healthier cruise than normal, but I'm saying that having eaten donuts for breakfast most days, so it wasn't necessarily me being healthier. Towards the back of the buffet is a specialty restaurant called the Hot Pot. I didn't ever go there for dinner, but they would open up this space the rest of the day, and I always found it quieter down there, so I would normally wander and sit that way. Sea days are the perfect way to explore a cruise ship, and I set out to see some of the places that I hadn't seen yet. Starting inside, I found the casino, which was surprisingly popular during this cruise. I didn't expect it to be for some reason, but it was. I also found this shopping area and I had a look around the shops. On cruises, for tax reasons, the shops are only open when the ship is out to sea, so the evenings and the sea days become really good times for shopping. I couldn't read a lot of the things in the shops, and they did have things like skin whitening creams, which I'm definitely not used to seeing on any European or American Royal Caribbean cruises. It's interesting to see the locals inside of the ship trying to get paler, and us Brits on the top deck just trying to get a tan. They did also sell heart pills here. No idea what they do, but if anyone needs a heart pill, let me know. Above the shop was a robot bartender, and the thing that I struggled with about this bar was that they had a screensaver on the wall, which by itself is absolutely lovely, but the cursor just really needs to move to the side just a tiny bit so that that box goes away. Every time I saw this, I just wanted to hunt down the mouse wherever it was and just move that cursor. I'm sure nobody else cares about things like this, but I do, and if you do, let me know in the comments. I didn't want to pay the robot to make me a drink, but I did watch it make a couple for other people. It is pretty cool to see, but I of course would prefer a nice pub here or a lounge that didn't cost extra. They actually changed the pub downstairs from the American version of the ship, and they changed it to a specialty tea and coffee venue called Leaf and Bean. I did miss the pub, but even more I missed those self-serve soda machines, especially when I was constantly nervous about being served Coke Plus. Looking at the daily schedule, which was in the app, I saw that laser tag was happening in the Sportsplex. I saw this space the day before as a bumper car arena, so I wanted to see how they could change this space. They do also use this for sports competitions and other things in here, so this space is very well used. There's always something happening. Laser tag is chargeable and you do need closed-toe shoes to play. I preferred to watch from the top level, and up here there were other games like ping pong and Xboxes. I didn't think that there were many kids on this cruise, and I would find out later just how many or how few there really were. We decided to head to 270 for lunch. This is an area at the back of the ship where you can get salads and sandwiches and cookies. It was a great option when we came back from an excursion too late for the buffet but too early for dinner. Here you could get water, fruit punch, lemonade and sometimes other drinks free of charge. This is the same in the buffet, and the water is always free in the main dining room on Royal Caribbean cruises. All of the drinks in the bar do cost money though, and you can either buy a drinks package or you can just pay as you go. I will talk more at the end of this video about how much everything cost. Everything on the cruise is charged to your cruise card, and it comes off your real card at the end of the cruise automatically. The app was great for checking our onboard spend as we went, and overall I think this is one of the best apps in the industry. I just wish it worked for booking things. After lunch, we found one of my favourite places on board, and that is the Solarium. It was always very easy to find our way around the ship because they have these 3D models that helped me to visualise and understand where I was and where I was going. I wish every cruise line had these. The Solarium is adult only, and it has amazing views on 3 sides. I think that the middle restaurant here is for people who have a suite or something, but I usually just came here to get a drink and to sit in one of the comfortable chairs. We could always get a seat in here even on sea days, and during the evenings there would be so few people here. If you wanted to have the pools all to yourself, you could, and the lifeguard would just be your personal guard. Royal Caribbean have lifeguards the entire time that the pools are open, even if nobody is in there. I did feel bad for them just standing and staring at the pool, but hopefully they do work on rotation and it's not just one person's job to look after the pool all day. By the outside pool, they did show funny videos of cats and dogs and all kinds of things. They did show one TV show which was a collection of funny accidents, and I'm putting accidents in air quotes there because I'm not sure that funny accidents really is a thing, but they actually showed a clip in that TV show of a Norwegian cruise line ship crashing into the pier. That one did make me laugh. I'm sure that Royal Caribbean just bought the whole show and they didn't do that on purpose, but it was still quite funny to show the competition doing something bad. It was at least 30 to 35 Celsius every day of our cruise, and the humidity did get up to 80%, that's at least 90 Fahrenheit and beyond. It was time for our first trivia of the cruise. There would usually be at least 5 or 6 themed trivias per day, plus more game shows. They normally happened in what is called the Schooner Bar, which is a Royal Caribbean staple, or in the music hall. My main memory of the music hall on board Anthem of the Seas was that it smelt really bad. It smelled like sick all of the time, but I'm happy to report that Spectrum smelt fantastic, and I'm sure that they've cleaned up Anthems by now. The music hall is spread over 2 floors with a bar on the top and the bottom. They'd often have live music here in the evenings, and my cabin was right above this room. The service was always very good here, and we rarely had to queue at a bar. The waiters would come round and they would offer us replacement drinks pretty fast every time. I don't know why, but pre-cruise I hadn't imagined that this would be a party cruise, perhaps because we had so many ports and to me each one was so interesting, but people were up partying until midnight, 2 a.m, 4 a.m. in the musical, and I could hear them from my cabin. They even had a country night one night, which I thought was quite funny. It made me wonder if on cruises out of Texas, do they have a Singapore party? I doubt it, but it was a funny idea. The first trivia was guess the movie from the emojis, and I'll let you have a go at this one. Pause it if you need more time. It's an odd choice for a cruise, I have to say. We did various types of trivia throughout the cruise, and I didn't always do well, but I did always learn something. We decided to check out Sorrento's Pizza for dinner. I didn't want to pay any extra for specialty meals during this cruise, but one thing that I did like about the specialty restaurants that I've never seen on a cruise before was that they had mocked up dishes outside the restaurant so that you can actually see what you're going to get before you order. This is the dream. I wish every restaurant did this, and I wish every restaurant's menu had photos on it, to be quite honest. I understand why they don't do that, because someone would get their meal and they would say, oh, the picture has 3 carrots, I only have 2 carrots. But still, I really like it. I think this was a cultural difference, and another one is that everyone on this cruise seemed incredibly organised and early to things. I showed up to the theatre around 15 minutes before showtime, which usually is plenty of time, and I could only find a seat perching right at the back of the theatre. My view was actually pretty good given how far back I was, but it taught me that I needed to be earlier next time. The theatre itself is huge and it's split over 2 levels. The seats are very comfortable, they have cup holders, and there aren't too many pillars or posts in the way. The show that we watched was a production show team song and dance, and they of course played a song from The Greatest Showman. I think every cruise I've been on since 2018 at some point has played a song from The Greatest Showman, so I do always wait and see when it is. On this cruise it was on day 2, which is pretty good. The singers and the dancers were fantastic, and I was looking forward to seeing more of them later. I'd heard about a superhero show in the theatre, and I also wanted to see the show in 270. The show in 270 was the only show that we had to book a space for, and my phone still wasn't letting me book anything, so I went to reception to book. It was in the evening, so there was no queue, and I also booked a trip on the North Star for later in the cruise. The North Star does free trips on port days, and it does extended chargeable versions on sea days. I'll let you decide which one I booked. If you've watched my videos before, I think you'll know. After a quick line of the promenade deck, I decided to call it a night. And yes, I mean a line of the promenade deck, not a lap of the promenade deck, because it doesn't go all the way around, so it was an up and down. Nha Trang in Vietnam was our first and only tender port, which I was very happy about. Tender ports are where you use the ship's lifeboats to get to land, and although they can be fun, it does slow things down as you're always having to wait for a tender. We had a Royal Caribbean excursion book, so we were given a time to meet in the theatre and priority tender boat tickets. In total, I took 3 cruise line excursions on this cruise, 1 in Vietnam and 2 in Japan. In the other ports in Hong Kong and 1 port in Japan, I decided to do something a little more DIY. After our day in Nha Trang, there was a surprise waiting for us in the buffet, and I think even if you had 100 guesses, maybe 1,000 guesses, you would not get it. It was a giant panda dancing because, well, why not? We did also see a bear in the buffet who is the mascot of the port we visited called Kumamoto. The bear is called Kumamon, which I think is adorable. I wish my town had a bear mascot, but I suppose we do have Captain Hudson. That actually wasn't my favourite buffet surprise though. On a couple of occasions, a chocolate fountain would appear with marshmallows, and that is my ideal kind of dessert. I also really like this meringue in the main dining room. I have quite simple taste when it comes to dessert. Pandas were definitely a theme on this cruise, and there were these panda figures at the back of the ship. This is where there is a giraffe on board Anthem of the Seas, and it is a big pink bear on board Quantum. It is so funny to me that it is somebody's job to come up with these. I just love that. I didn't ever have a go on the rock climbing wall, but I have been on the flow rider before. I managed to get to my knees, and one go, that was plenty for me. In this clip, it almost looks like Captain Hudson made this man fall over, but he tells me that he didn't. Also at the back of the ship, there was this area that's kind of redundant now. It originally started popping up on Royal Caribbean ships in 2018, and the idea was that you would go in here, you'd put on a VR headset, and you would jump on the trampolines. That does sound like a lot of fun, but I do get motion sick, so I'm not sure that this really would have been the thing for me. Royal Caribbean have since started to remove the trampolines, and these domes are now used for games like beanbag toss. Shuffleboard was also quite popular on this cruise, and that is the UK quite, not the American quite. It was so nice to see everybody out enjoying themselves, and the ship really didn't feel crowded at all. I found out that there were a little over 3,000 people on this cruise, so realistically the ship could have fit another 1,000, so that explains it. It would have been a very different cruise with an extra 1,000 people on it. It wasn't until the balloon drop party later in the cruise that I realised just how many people were on this ship. It definitely felt more luxurious because of the reduced capacity, because normally you'd have to pay a lot for this space per person. I'll tell you how much I paid for this cruise in a little bit. It is quite normal for cruises in this part of the world and cruises of this length to be at reduced capacity, just because there are fewer kids on board than there may be on a shorter sailing somewhere else. That means that the third and fourth spots in the cabins weren't filled up. Our cruise had only 254 children on board, meaning that a lot of the beds on the ship were empty. Heading back into the ship, we decided to stop at the hot dog stand for lunch. There aren't any vegetarian options here, which is a shame, but they do have a couple of different types of hot dogs that you can order. It was here that I made a little mistake, and I say mistake, but I think most people would do the same as I did in this situation. I had a soda package on this cruise, and on Anthem of the Seas there were 2 drink machines here so that I could get a soda anytime, which I loved. The man working behind the hot dog stand asked me if I wanted a drink, and I saw Coke Zero behind him, so I asked if I could have one. It wasn't until he started to ring it up that I realised that those Coke Zeros were not included in my drinks package. When I realised that, I said, no thank you, I'll just walk to another bar, it's not very far, and I'll get one that's included in my drinks package. There are often drinks package quirks like this, so if someone tries to charge you for something that you're not expecting, make sure you ask what's going on. In the middle of the ship, by the robot bartender, they would often have sales, and the audience on board went wild for it. I've never seen anything like it on a cruise before. It was like everyone had never seen a hat or a scarf before. Great business for Royal Caribbean, I'm sure, and it was great fun for me to watch. The captain did also come down to this area to have photos taken with the guests, which was nice, and I really liked how everybody was just able to take photos with their phones. Sometimes a cruise line will organise something like this. They'll have their professional photographers there and not let you take your own photos, the idea being that you'll have to pretty much buy the ones from the cruise line, so I liked how that didn't happen here. The queue did get pretty long. The captain was a popular man. We decided to head to the main dining room for dinner, and we were seated on the bottom level, which was cool. I like to sit in all different places. Again, the food was good and the service was quick. I did read one review pre-cruise that said, I normally take pictures of the dishes that I eat, but they were simply too ugly and weren't worth the effort. I don't think that these meals are ugly, I'll let you decide, but I care a lot more about what food tastes like than looks like anyway. The vegetarian options and dietary requirements were clearly marked on the menu, and what I liked was being able to look at all of the menus before I got anywhere near the restaurant because I could have a look at them on the app. During the cruise, I think we sat in every section of the main dining room, on the top, the bottom, both the sides. This is because we had freestyle dining and we didn't have a fixed dining time. That meant that we didn't have a fixed table or fixed waiters. Personally, I really like it like that. We got to meet a lot of people. Sometimes we'd have a nice view out of the window. Sometimes we'd have a view of everybody else. At the start of our cruise, I did phone to book my meals, but I noticed that they never checked it and they were always able to seat us straight away. So we really just started showing up and there was never any problem. We never had to wait. I never saw any queues for the main dining room, and that may have had something to do with the reduced capacity, but I even managed to eat at 6 p.m. a couple of days when officially the flexible dining doesn't start until 6:45, but they never minded, they always sat us. I was missing one food though, and that was cookies. Usually they have a cafe promenade in the main street and they have these big bowls in the buffet, but I hadn't found any yet. I made it my mission to try and find cookies the next day. Royal Caribbean's cookies are normally pretty good, so it was like a scavenger hunt, but with cookies. A little later in the evening, I went to see a superhero show called Effectors, and I was sat right behind this pole, which provided me with lots of entertainment. The pole was right in the middle of the walkway, so in theory, people should have walked round to the other side to get into this row, but they always tried to squeeze round the pole, and I would say about 50% of the time, they were successful getting around this pole. Sometimes they'd have to just go back and in the other side. Some people did really try. They would be breathing in, bending at odd angles. It was quite funny for me and whoever they were sitting with. The show was good, and we also watched the Australian Beatles. It was a little bit bizarre to be in Asia listening to an Australian band singing the Beatles, but they were fantastic. The audience loved it, and I even got my phone out to use as a torch. There are definitely two types of people on the cruise, those who wave their torches and those who don't. I'm definitely on the torch team. I am happy to participate as long as I'm in the dark, nobody can see me, and I don't have to stand up. I think that is my comfort zone for audience participation. After the theatre show, we headed to the balloon drop, which was the busiest that I ever saw this ship. I stood in my spot for about 20 minutes before the balloon drop to try and get some good footage, but there were so many people behind me, literally leaning over me to film, resting their arms on my shoulders and trying to push me out of the way. There was no sense of personal space at all, and it was a shame. Some people were so in my space, but I was not moving because I had stood there for a reason. There were some really rude guests on this cruise, but that is not Royal Caribbean's fault. As my mum would say, good manners cost nothing, but some of these people clearly could not afford nothing. There were guests everywhere and I didn't manage to get any good footage, but this is the reality of cruising sometimes, and I don't want to pretend that everyone on a cruise has a front row seat to every event. If something is popular and everyone wants to go, 3,000 people could go to this event, so it's going to be busy. It was chock-a-block, and that is your Britishism of the week. I think this just is the definition of chock-a-block, but the official definition is crammed full of people or things. I think we can agree this is chock-a-block. It never felt this busy on the cruise again, and it was really interesting to see where the different people would go to and how it was split by nationality. If you wanted to find someone from England, you would go to trivia. If you wanted to find someone from Singapore, you would go to the karaoke bar, which for some reason they had taken the bar out of. If you tried to take the bar out of the karaoke bar on an American cruise line, there would be outrage, but it was always very popular and there were some fantastic singers. On this cruise, I would mostly find the Americans and the Canadians when it was bingo time in the music hall, and it turns out that 60 million people play bingo every year in the States, so that does make sense. I think a lot of Brits do play bingo too, but I didn't play it during the cruise. You can quite often win cruises when you play bingo on a cruise, which I find a bit funny that you're winning a cruise to come back and play more bingo, but it is what it is, and now the word bingo doesn't sound right anymore. Bingo was his name, B-I-N-G-O. At karaoke, the guests of course sang in whatever language they wanted to, but around the ship, announcements were only done in English, and English was very much the default. The top nationalities of guests on this cruise were Singaporeans, most of which speak English, followed by Americans and Australians. Next up was China and the UK. Less than 10% of the people on this cruise were from China, so even though the signs were in Mandarin, I guess they thought it wasn't worth doing announcements like that. What languages the announcements are in on a cruise depends very much on who's on the cruise. I've taken cruises with Italian cruise lines where they've announced things in 5 or 6 different languages sometimes. I'm hoping that everyone on board could read the sign that said, "Please refrain from letting your children in the pool right after eating." The sign explains that it takes 5 hours to clean the pool after every sickness incident, and you can tell that this sign was written following one of those incidents. You can tell. We saw a show in 270 called Silk Road, and although it was entertaining, if there was a story, it was totally lost on me. I had no idea what was going on. Still, there were plenty of interesting costumes and set pieces to look at, and I enjoyed watching the screens at the back. I don't think that the show was as impressive as the ones I saw on Anthem of the Seas. They definitely had more acrobatics, but every singer and dancer was fantastic. It definitely was entertaining, it was just very different from what I expected. There wasn't really any spoken word, and the songs would kind of just be sung in oohs and ahs. At one point they sang a Katy Perry song, but they only did the oohs, which was a bit bizarre. I did manage to find the cookies, but they were slightly hidden away. They're in a place called La Patisserie, which is a specialty cafe where most things cost extra. It was like Royal Caribbean had combined this specialty cafe with the free version that they have on their other ships. You could buy macaroons or pastries, but most importantly to me, there were the normal free cookie jars on top, and we could order them anytime we wanted. I'm sure that a lot of people missed out on these because they were inside this specialty venue. I only really found them because of my cookie hunting skills that I have honed over many years. I was 11 when I first had a cruise ship cookie, and I've been looking for them ever since. This cruise actually wasn't too expensive, but still, I wanted to make sure that I got the most out of the money that I did spend, and that meant eating a lot of included cookies. In total for this cruise, for 12 nights, I paid £1,819.92, which is a little over $2,200. It was more than my usual £100 per person per night budget, but this was for an obstructed view balcony cabin and not an inside cabin. I was very happy with that price given that I didn't book it particularly far in advance or last minute, and it was such a bucket list trip for me. The flights from the UK did cost far more than the cruise, and I spent more on this cruise than I would usually. I'm normally pretty good at coming off a cruise with a £0 bill. The £1,819.92 was my cruise fare based on 2 people sharing a cabin, so that was my half, that was my cruise fare. That included the daily gratuities or tips that Royal Caribbean add on, but it didn't include any drinks, Wi-Fi or excursions. I added on the soda package, which cost £115.80, which is around $140, which was well worth it. A soda on a cruise usually costs around £3, so all I had to have was 3 sodas per day and I broke even. I definitely did that, and I didn't spend any extra money on drinks during this cruise. The Wi-Fi came in at £274.56 for 2 devices, but we were actually refunded 3 days worth because Royal Caribbean knew that the Wi-Fi wouldn't work when we were sailing near China. They wouldn't say why it wouldn't work, but I think that we can deduce that China and Starlink, which is the company that Royal Caribbean use for their Wi-Fi, they are not friends. Interestingly though, on those days where I didn't have any internet access, WhatsApp and Facebook still kind of sort of worked. I could not send a basic text email, but I could send a video through WhatsApp. It was a bit bizarre. The rest of the time during the cruise, the internet was great, and I would use my regular phone when we were in ports, as most of the countries that we visited were no extra cost on my roaming plan. So it's always worth checking that. I do sometimes buy a soda package and a Wi-Fi package when I cruise, but what I don't normally spend money on is excursions. On this one though, I bought 3 excursions, which came in at a total of £309.92, which is $377. These are very random and specific amounts, by the way, because of the currency conversion. It certainly wasn't a cheap cruise, and I do usually like to do things on a budget, but this is why I do things on a budget. I like to save money on things that don't really matter to me, like my obstructive view cabin, so that I can spend the money on the things that I care about. The excursions were absolutely worth the money to me, and I will never forget the places that we went to or the things that we saw. To find out what we got up to and how we actually left 3 people in one of the ports, watch this video next.